Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Faith Chats with Andrew Brunet, where our topic is always about faith, family, freedom, and America. Today, my guest is Pastor Ed Newton, and he's written a brand new book called Why Not You? Believing what God believes about you. Welcome to the program, Pastor Ed.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the opportunity, my man.
I'm excited about this conversation. I read the little synopsis about your book, and I told the people at HarperCollins Publishing, I was like, man, we got to get this pastor on. I'm a newly licensed evangelist myself, non denominational, and I tell you, man, we pastors have got to stick together. Iron sharpens iron.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. Well, congratulations, man, to that.
So, can you share with us more about that pivotal moment at McDonald's when you were 10 years old?
Yeah, my parents were deaf. My mom and dad are in heaven. But when I was 10 years old, I was interpreting for my mom and dad. And what ended up coming out of that moment was something I didn't recognize at the time of what it really was about. It was a prophetic moment where a woman of God really spoke into my life. She said, "Do you do this everywhere you go?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." And then at that moment, she chose to speak over me. She says, "I just want to tell you, young man," I was about 9 or 10 years old at the time. And she said, "God's going to greatly use you." And man, uh, crazy. I'm 50. So that's like almost 40 years ago. And I still remember it as if it was just today that she imparted something into me that one day God would greatly use me. And it wouldn't be till another 5 years from that moment that I'd actually give my life to Jesus. So that kind of puts it in context. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. I didn't go to church. She just took a moment to speak into my life.
Wow, that's amazing. So, how did the prophecy from that woman shape your understanding of God's calling, especially since you didn't have a relationship with the Lord at the time?
Yeah, I don't know if I really even understood the weight of it until I became a Christian several years later, where I was in elementary school at that time, and it wouldn't come to a fuller understanding until I was in high school. Like, oh God, it's interesting, and I'm sure you can relate with this, Andrew. There's moments where God begins to piece things together that you didn't even know were puzzle pieces to even look at in the first place. And so I become a follower of Jesus in high school, and then these puzzle pieces start moving together, and then I could see the what I call the fingerprints of God in my life, and that was a major one.
Wow. So, continuing on, growing up as a child of deaf adults or CODA must have been presented unique challenges and perspectives. How did those experiences influence your sense of identity and purpose? And how did they weave into the stories and why not you?
Yeah, both my mom and dad being deaf helped me understand something significant of what I would call advocacy, sticking up for them. Obviously, during those days, there were some very difficult days where people didn't understand how to actually interact with deaf people, and there weren't laws that protected against discrimination. So my mom and dad lost a lot of jobs along the way just for being deaf, not because they couldn't do the job, just because people didn't know how to communicate with them. And so for me, advocacy was a big deal, but also being an interpreter, where ultimately sharing the sentiment of what my mom and dad wanted me to say, learning how to communicate with adults, even though I'm 10, 11, 12 as a teenager, even to the point they died, I was always having to mediate for them, advocate for them, interpret for them. And one day I asked my dad, I said, "Do you wish," I was probably in my young 30s, and I said, "Dad, do you wish you could be healed?" And he said, "No." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Deaf and proud." He signed to me, "Deaf and proud." And in that moment, I said, "Why do you say that?" He says, "You." He said, "Look at you. God's greatly using you." And he said, and this was the moment I understood. He said, "God put you in a deaf home where we couldn't speak, and you spoke for us, and now you speak for God. And he can speak for himself, but he chooses to use you. And so basically you're telling everybody what God says, and God trained you in this house to do that."
Wow, what a moment.
Yeah.
You were born in North Carolina, raised in Florida, and now lead a church in San Antonio, Texas. How has moving across different regions and cultures impacted your journey toward embracing your God given abilities?
Yeah, I think for me, everything that we all go through, you, myself, our listeners, God uses everything that we face, every move we make, every classroom we sat in as a kid, every teacher, every coach. And it's a part of a disciple making process. It's a part of our sanctification process. And God used all of that to lead me to where I am today. Nothing was wasted. I want to be an encouragement to somebody listening today. God will never waste your pain. God will never waste the transitions. While we wait in the waiting room of life, God's always working as the great physician, the great surgeon. He's Jehovah Jireh. He's always going to show up on time. He may not be early, Andrew, but he may not be early. He definitely ain't going to be late. He always shows up on time.
Right. So, continuing on in the conversation, what sparked the idea for Why Not You? Was there a specific personal setback or setup for success in your life that made you feel compelled to write this book?
Yeah, I encountered a gentleman in 2010, 2011 named Chuck Yates, and actually I dedicate the book to him. I was a guest preacher as an evangelist, and that's the journey you're on today. You show up in some places where you don't know anybody. Sometimes you show up and you know some people, but I showed up at a church I didn't know anybody, and it was a men's conference. And I probably wasn't the guy that they were expecting. Skinny jeans, deep V neck, t shirt, flat bill cap, hair down on my shoulders. This is some Texas dudes. Um, and man, I didn't fit in. And a guy named Chuck Yates, who had a full goatee, gauges in his ear, older gentleman, hugs me, kisses me on the cheek, and points into my chest, Andrew. And this is what he says. He goes, God's going to greatly use somebody. It might as well be you. He says, why not you? So that was the first time I heard it. And then God began to use that statement prolifically in my life because I wrestled with a lot of insecurity and a lot of doubts and a lot of lids that I was living under. And Andrew, let me just say this out loud. Nobody talks more to Andrew than Andrew. Nobody talks more to Ed than Ed. And if life and death are in the power of the tongue, then what are we saying to ourselves?
Right.
And man, I had a moment about 5 years ago where I began to, okay, I got to talk to myself different. I'm not talking about a self-confidence. I'm talking about a God confidence, believing what God believes about me. That's why it's the subtitle of the book. Believe what God believes about you. Because when it comes to identity, it's not just who you are and whose you are, it's why you are. Um, but more importantly, before you can ever try to find out who you are, you got to know who God is. That He's good, He's strong, He's faithful. He'll never waste your pain.
So, having a forward from Max Lucado is a huge honor. How did that collaboration come about?
Yeah, He's a spiritual father to me and has come alongside of me. He's a fellow pastor in San Antonio where I live and prolific writer, prolific preacher, but more than anything else, he's a faithful man of God that is so gracious to me to walk alongside of me. So yeah, excuse me, he's a dear friend and a dear brother and a father and a pastor to me.
Wow. So, how did this collaboration come about, and what does his endorsement mean to you as you invite readers to walk the road of biblical identity?
Yeah, his he doesn't endorse books anymore. That's what I know. And I said, Pastor Max, I'm asking, I'm begging. And he said, "You don't got to beg me." He said, you're special to me." And it means a lot. It just means a lot that he would believe in me at a lot of levels. So I thank God for Pastor Max. God's used him very significantly in my life.
So, your previous book, My Eight, Embrace and Engage in the Wonder of Evangelism, focuses on outreach. How does Why Not You build on or differ from that, particularly in addressing self doubt among Christ followers?
Yeah, my eight. That book was a connective reality. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, Andrew, but all of the global, and you're an evangelist, so all the evangelism verses, and we know that chapters and verses are not inspired by God. They came on in the 12th century. Old Testament, New Testament was scrolls, so there wasn't like chapter and verse. But when you look at all the evangelistic verses, there's a common theme. There is Matthew 28,
Right.
there's Acts 1:8, there's Acts 8:1, and there's Isaiah 6:8. And so I just embrace the eight because the word or the number eight in numerology means new beginnings. And if you really pay attention to a lot of Jewish history and culture, numbers mean something, and numbers mean something. There's a whole book dedicated to numbers in the Bible. And then there's significant, like the Trinity is three, and then you can see like the number of man is six, and well, the number of eight is new beginnings. So if I were to connect it together, nobody's ever asked me that question. So Andrew, thank you for that. That's a great question. Is that we serve a God of new beginnings. When somebody puts their faith and trust in Jesus, the old is gone, the new has come, 2 Corinthians 5:17. And so we serve a God of new beginnings. Matter of fact, the book of Revelation says he makes all things new. And I believe for somebody today that has been defined by their past, come on, man, let me preach for a second.
Come on.
Defined by their past, feeling as if that God can't use them. Number 8, new beginnings. Why not you?
And I mean, I could sit here and tell you my testimony. In 2023, I was in the hospital 17 times,
Hmm.
diagnosed with stage 5 kidney disease, on dialysis 3 times a week. And there were several times I asked the Lord, why me?
Yep.
Why me? And just like you stated, I heard the Lord come back and say, why not you?
It's great. It's great. Yeah, and that's in the book, Andrew. We got to get to a place where we stop saying why me, because if God allowed it to come to you, and I wish you wouldn't have gone through that, but I know you well enough now that what God brought to you was for you, and now God's greatly using it through you.
So the book challenges the very human tendency to believe the best for others and the worst for ourselves. What are some of the common lies you've seen in your pastoral ministry that keep people from operating in their full potential?
I think at the end of the day, I think what people end up saying is that they're not good enough, smart enough, not fast enough, and bottom line, whatever that fill in the blank is, it's typically has two words after it, not enough. It's just we never feel enough. And what's beautiful about Matthew chapter 3 and Jesus and his encounter with John the Baptist is God the Father speaks over Jesus. Check this out, Andrew. He speaks over Jesus and says, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." And when you think about that chronologically in the life of Jesus, Andrew, did he do anything? Jesus didn't do anything.
Well,
He didn't walk on water. He didn't break 5 loaves, 2 fish. He didn't heal the demoniac. He didn't go to the cross. He didn't come back from the dead. But God the Father said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." Check this out. God was giving him his pleasure
right.
before he performed.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing that people need to hear today is that God is pleased by you, not because you perform for him, but because he put his son inside of you through the power of the Holy Spirit. And so every time God looks at you, he can't help but see Jesus.
So you emphasize operating out of our God-given identity rather than just abilities. Can you walk us through a practical step from the book for retraining our minds to view ourselves from God's perspective?
Yeah, there's not a better application I can give than 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 that says, "Take every thought captive." And I think the greatest form of application is when you say stuff like this, it's just always going to be this way, or I'm just slow, or I'm just a mistake. We use self-deprecation sometimes to be funny. For somebody that battles weight, they will go, "I'm just the fat guy." It's like, man, stop speaking that over you. You're not just that guy. You're a child of God. You're a son of God. You're a daughter of God. And I think that's the biggest part of the message is that we got to pay attention to what we say to ourselves. And then when somebody says something to us that can be so hurtful, don't let it stick, man, because the blood of Jesus covers you.
So, how do you help readers distinguish between genuine personal limitations and the self-doubt that's holding them back?
Yeah. They're what we call prohibitations, and then there's limitations. And prohibitations are the things in your life that are prohibitors, things that you go, man, uh, such as I'm 6'2", but I can't dunk. I haven't been able to dunk my whole life. And could I train myself to dunk? I don't know. But there were some prohibitors. that I just didn't have the athletic ability to do that. And so there's things that that prevent us naturally from doing what we can do. I can't fly. That's a prohibit. That's a prohibitor. Um, those are things that we just go, okay, I got to live with the fact I can't fly. I don't know, Andrew. I don't, have you woken up? Did you wake up today and go, you know what, man? I think I can fly. You know, no, it's a prohibitor, right?
Right.
But I think there's some things that God goes, no, but you can do this.
Right.
But you keep limiting yourself by the fact that you keep saying this. And God goes, but I gave you the power to do that. And you actually have had a bunch of people in your life tell you, and I guarantee, Andrew, this is what God did for you. Yeah, I'm sure he called you to be an evangelist, but I guarantee you some other people looked at you and said, Andrew, have you ever thought about being an evangelist? And
Mhm.
you said, wow, you're the 17th person that's told me that, you know? And
Right.
what God does is remind you that he's called you to something. So if God's giving you a word personally in your prayer time, confirmed it in scripture, and used other people to validate it, stop limiting yourself.
So, continuing on, for someone battling negative self talk and insecurities, what's the first exercise or reflection from Why Not You?
Yeah, I think you have to look through the scripture and recognize that God does not parade perfect people. I mean, you think about it, Andrew. If you were writing a Bible, would you include the stories of David having an inappropriate relationship with Bathsheba? You wouldn't. You'd leave those stories out, man. Would you have included the inappropriate reality of Noah and his sons? You're
Yeah.
like, man, that's I think we're gonna leave that one out. But God leaves those moments in the Bible not to magnify their sin, but the fact it magnifies God, that God uses broken people. And it's 2 Corinthians 12:9, man. In my weakness, God's made strong. So I'm gonna boast in my weakness because that's where the power's at. I'm not defined by my anxiety. I'm not defined by my depression. I am not depression. I am not anxiety. But do I battle depression? Yep. Do I battle anxiety? Yep. But I am not depression. I am not anxiety. And that's the kind of language that we got to start using with ourselves.
And what would you recommend they try to start seeing their setbacks as setups for success?
Yeah. Is ask the question, um, God, not why me, and you mentioned this earlier, but what are you trying to do through this? Because when we look at Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who love God and call according to his purpose. I think we have to ask the question, does that mean all things? Does all things mean all things? And that's where we got to begin because sometimes we go, yeah, God, you could do that thing, but you can't use this thing because this thing was a major screw up. And here's what we know to be true is that sometimes in those major screw up moments where we go, God, I made a massive mistake. You learn from it, you grow from it. Proverbs says a righteous man falls down 7 times, gets back up again. And what if, in the effort of you getting back up, becomes inspiration to somebody else that's down and out, that by you doing what you're doing, here's the reason why this is important. 2 Corinthians talks about that we sort of serve a God of comfort in affliction, that those who've gone through affliction can find comfort. And well, yeah, they can find comfort from God, but what does God say? But you can give them comfort because God brought you through that. And what I would say is that whatever God brings to you, even some of the things you think God can't use, it's like gumbo, Andrew. It's like gumbo. Some of the stuff you're like, dear God, that on its own tastes awful.
Right.
You throw that in that crock pot, somehow, some way, it brings a little flavor. The thing that you think God can't use, God's putting it in the crock pot because it's going to add a different flavor to who you are.
So the book aims to help readers stop questioning their gifts and talents and start living in them. Based on feedback from early readers or your congregation, what's one story of transformation that's encouraged you the most?
Yeah, what I'm finding out from this book is all of us that battle self-doubt are finding a flicker of faith to go, you know what? I've always believed the best about everybody else. Why am I self-sabotaging? And that's a big word, but I think there's a lot of people that count themselves out and will say stuff like, "Hey, man, I think Andrew's better fit at that." And that may be true, but I think a lot of times people will delegate something because they're afraid of failure. We got to stop being afraid of failure. Failure is not failure. Failure is staying down when you've lost or didn't get what you wanted. It's choosing to quit. That's failure. Getting back up, not failure. I've learned another reason not to do what I just did or to do it a different way.
So, as a pastor with a doctorate in pulpit education and expository preaching, how do you integrate the themes of purpose and identity into your sermons at Community Bible Church?
Yeah, that's a part of everything we do. It goes back to what I said earlier. You 85% of Christians, Andrew, don't know why they're on the earth. I mean, think about that. They don't even know why they're on the earth. So to me, everything's about identity. Matter of fact, I think you could look at this in Daniel chapter 2. When the boys of Babylon were taken over and I call them the boys of Babylon, they were taken captive into Babylon and they were taught the language, the literature, and the sciences, and their language was changed, but their names got changed. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you go, so what is the ploy and the tactic of the devil? Make you forget who you are. And I think what we got to remind ourselves, that's why we got to stop using phrases like this. I'm just a sinner. True, true, yes, but I'm not just a sinner. I'm a son and daughter of the living God, who, by the way, yes, still struggles with sin. So,
Right. So, if you could speak directly to a reader who's settling for scraps of talent right now, what would you say to convince them that God is writing a story for them just as He did for you?
yeah, I would say to somebody that's holding the pen today, give it to God, let Him write the story because you might be writing a story that may not be big enough.
So looking ahead, how do you hope Why Not You will ripple out beyond individual readers, perhaps in small groups, churches, or even your own ministry at Community Bible Church?
Yeah, I think this is not just a book to put on a shelf. I mean, I got books in this office that just sit there. You know, you read them and then, or you skim them and they just sit on a shelf. This can't be a book. This has got to be a survival guide. You know, this has got to be something that it doesn't become a coaster. It tells people how to actually make it through life because um, to me, it's the pages out of my journal. It's my diary with a cover.
So finally, for aspiring authors or leaders feeling unqualified, what's your encouragement? Why not you indeed? And what's one piece of advice from your journey through Clearwater Christian College and Seminary that you'd pass on?
I think what I would say to somebody today is to go that it's not about your ability, it's about your availability.
Well, Pastor Ed, thank you so much for your time. I have enjoyed this chat. I encourage our viewers to pick up your book, Why Not You, coming out soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it, buddy. Take care.